Hey guys, Buildzoid here, back with another update on the game that I'm developing, and today we're going to be taking a look at another unnecessarily complicated mechanic that I decided to add, which is stackable explosives. So, here we have explosive boxes. These all have the same blast radius of 2.5 meters because the way the calculation is set up is bugged out right now. It's supposed to be 2 meters, but somebody's bad at writing code, so, it's bugged out. Anyway, yeah, so you can see these are all just like the same size explosions. But what happens if I shoot that stack over there? And you'll notice, and actually it's kind of hard to tell, but this explosion is somewhat bigger than the explosion of one box, but we can make it even bigger. I am going to put a bunch of boxes together, and now we get a really big explosion. Right, like the orange inner sphere is much, much larger than than like one individual box. And that's the stackable explosion mechanic for the game. And this is something that I've never actually seen in a game before. Like, at least anything I've ever played, like, the explosives didn't stack, right? So if you put, like, 10 bricks of C4 together, it would do 10 times more damage, but the blast radius would stay the same. Whereas what my system here does is it's stacked, like the damage still adds up. So yeah, if we have five orange cubes, they'll do 5 times more damage than one orange cube. But also they have a somewhat larger blast radius. How much larger? So this is spitting out 3.6 meters for the calculation, and one of these cubes is supposed to be 2.5, like is supposed to be 2 meters. I think the calculation's kind of bugged out right now because it's like self-count. Like the first, like one cube actually like counts itself as 2 cubes because I am very good at programming. But what it's supposed to do, so I can just calculate this manually. Yeah, so it's off by 0.2. So yeah, so this is 2.5 meters over here. Like the orange sphere is 2.5 meters. This one is 3.6 meters radius. So you can see how like the effective area, like the area of effect gets larger the more explosives you put together. And this doesn't stack infinitely, which initially I thought would be kind of cool if it did. Like, if you had like 500 of these, then you'd get an explosion that's like 500 times larger by volume. Because right now that's actually how the radius increases is volumetrically. So it doesn't like linearly add, like if you put a 2 meter explosion next to a 2 meter explosion, you don't get a 4 meter explosion. You get a like the explosion has a volume of 2 2 meter explosions added together. That's why like 2 meters plus 2 meters equals 2.5 meters. So yeah, that's how the growth of the radius works. Where was I going with that? But it doesn't grow indefinitely. And the reason it doesn't grow indefinitely is because it would behave weird in certain like scenarios, like say you have a line of explosions. Right? So if we have these in a line like this, it would cause like, because the thing is the calculation only does spheres, and if somebody was very clever, they could make it do fancier shapes than just spheres, but I am not very clever. I've got 2 brain cells. I am doing spheres. So if I had a line, you could, imagine a scenario where you shoot like one explosive in a line of explosives, and instead of getting a like line of explosions, you get one big sphere, which is stupid. So the sphere doesn't grow indefinitely, which does mean very large stacks of explosives are going to behave a bit strangely. But, and I haven't tested it yet, like what it does, because these aren't currently fully implemented. Like they don't do any damage. They don't despawn when they explode, because like if they did despawn, then I'd have to make a spawner for more explosives, and then this would just be like I do eventually have to do that anyway for testing purposes, but I haven't implemented that yet, and I wanted to test out the idea of like, does the stacking even work in the first place, and it does. But anyway, so the stack doesn't grow, like doesn't keep absorbing more explosive power into itself, because it would just like, it would cause so many more issues. It would also potentially get very expensive in terms of just, like, calculating it. And so I just decided, like, it's not going to grow. There is a fixed, like, stack radius, which might depend on what explosive you're using, or it might just be fixed in general. I'm not sure. I haven't really decided on that yet. And so if you have a big pile of explosive, what will probably happen is it'll sort of like hollow out and it'll kind of act like a line. But even in a line, if the explosives are close enough together, like two boxes next to each other, they'll add together, right? And actually you can sort of see that effect in action where it's like this explosion is smaller than this explosion because this explosion like grabs that box and that box. Right? So, yeah, so lines will sort of be like the lines will still have some grouping, like some stacking happening in them, but it won't be like the whole line won't stack into one. Only like boxes that are close together will get stacked together. And then if you have like a really big pile, that'll like also have like that'll end up in absolute chaos probably, because the main concern I have with a big pile is I am not sure how like what order the outer, like, because you'll have the like initial stack trigger, right? And then what about everything that's on top of the initial stack? And it's like, what order are those going to detonate in? I don't know. I'm not even sure if I'm going to do anything about it, because maybe the chaos that it'll create when it just like whatever order the engine decides to like trigger them in, right? The chaos of that might actually work out in my favor of making the effect look more chaotic. And if it doesn't, then I'm going to have to come up with some clever way of dealing, like setting up the behavior to be like fixing the behavior to behave the way that I want it to. But anyway, at this point you might be thinking, okay, Buildslate, so this seems extremely complicated and kind of unnecessary. Why? A very simple reason for why. I will not have blast occlusion. As in, explosions will go through walls, as you can see right here. And now you might be thinking, why? Like, why implement this really convoluted, like, explosion stacking system, and then you can't even be bothered to occlude explosions going through, like, yeah, occlude explosions going through walls? And there's a very simple reason for that. Explosives are typically used for, breaking through things like walls. But fully destructible environments are hard, very hard. And the alternative to fully destructible environments is like set pieces, destructible set pieces. And I absolutely hate the idea of destructible set pieces, because with a destructible set piece, like, you're basically telling, like, the player will you're basically telling the player, here is this special object that you can use this special game mechanic on. And I don't like that at all. What I like is when you have a game that has a few simple, consistent rules that allow you to do more complicated things with them, right? That's why I like the recoil boosting mechanic that I have in the game. Why I like bunny hopping, right? It's very simple. If you're like you decelerate, like the way my bunny hopping basically works is if you're in the air, you have less friction, so you can keep accelerating. If you're on the ground, you can't keep accelerating. So the less time you spend on the ground, the more faster you can go. Right? So that's like why the bunny hopping behaves the way it does. And then we have things like, oh, there's a wall kickoff mechanic. The wall kickoff mechanic works on literally any vertical surface. Guess what has a vertical surface and collisions? Oh, the shell casings do. You can kick off the shell casings. Right? And it's like, and admittedly, that looks very silly, but it's consistent within the rules of the game. You can kick off walls, and walls are just things with collisions. So logically, you should be able to kick off a shell casings, right? So similarly, I want like, okay, explosives stack their blast radius, like their damage and their blast radius stacks. Explosives do not get blocked by walls. Those are two simple rules. You can do things with that. More specifically, you can do things like, the planned structure for this game is to basically be like the objective of a level is going to be very Cruelty Squad-esque, where it's going to be like, oh, you need to like assassinate a target or retrieve something. There's sort of the two sort of mission types that I have in mind. Or multiple targets. I don't think I'm going to have anything like a retrieve and assassinate missions, but I mean, it wouldn't really be that difficult to implement, I guess. Um, but especially compared to these stupid explosives. But anyway, yeah, so you'll have like objectives where it's like, oh, assassinate a target, retrieve something, that kind of stuff, and or destroy something, which is the same as like assassinate a target as far as I'm concerned, because NPCs and destructible objects in games are basically the same thing. But anyway, yeah, so I was thinking like, okay, so let's say you get an assassination mission where there's a target inside a multi-story building, right? And the floor that the target is on is just crawling with security. So very difficult to get in there, and like you could play the mission loud, but what if you don't have the equipment or you just don't want to play the mission loud? You want to try go stealthy. Well, one option you could have is you could like let's say the floor one floor down, the security is a lot lighter. And you know where the target's like office is and where they're currently located, right? You might like see them through the window or something. Like you can you'll have some way to figure out where the target is, or you can just like blindly blow up the entire building. That's also an option with the system I'm setting up. But anyway, so you know where the target is, and you'll do something like say the target is sitting at their desk. So on the floor below them, you drag a desk or some kind of box or something. You drag that under where the target is sitting, and then you just stack these cheerful little orange cubes of fun on top of the table that you just dragged over under there, under the floor, like on the lower floor. And then once you stack enough of these, you can walk outside the building and like shoot them with a silenced pistol. That'll set off the explosion. It'll kill the target, and that counts as a stealth kill. As long as, none of the guards noticed you stacking orange boxes on the floor below the target. So that's kind of why I want these kinds of mechanics. Or you could do something like, oh, there's like an ammunition storage building. And you could, walk in the front door and put like a timed whatever, like some kind of timed detonator inside and then walk away. Or you could just stack up a bunch of explosives at the side of one of the walls and then detonate that from like a really large distance. Right? So that's sort of my thought process on like why I want this, because it just gives you a lot more options for killing things that you can't see directly, right? That you don't have direct line of sight on. Because yeah, like that is just a mechanic I want. And so explosives are stackable. So mainly so that you can do that kind of thing where it's like, yeah, stack a bunch of explosives on one side of a wall or a floor or a ceiling so that you can kill whatever's on the other side of it. Is sort of my main thought process on why I wanted this mechanic. Because aside from that, there's really no other use for it that I can think of, right? Like at the end of the day, the only reason you'd ever want a bigger explosion is as in like blast radius is so that you can kill things that are further away from the center of the explosion. Right? Like that's literally the only purpose this serves. So yeah, and I just like big explosions in games. So here you have modular explosions, basically. Because the thing is, like, you could, like, come up with the alternative solution of, like the lazy option for what I'm trying to do is, like, you could just give the player a bigger explosive. But I feel like that's just making it too obvious. Right? Like, that removes the like, admittedly, it makes it a bit less tedious because stacking these cubes is going to potentially kind of suck to do. But it also, like, I don't like it when the game, like, gives away what you're supposed to do with, like, blatant, like, really obvious geometry design or really obvious, like really obvious set pieces, right? So I really want this to be a case of like, yeah, they're like explosives have rules, and those rules are that the explosions add up as long as the explosives do enough damage to each other to trigger each other, right? And so, you know, the player could could set up this kind of thing not just by finding random explosives around the level. They could also bring a bunch of C4, or they could bring a rocket launcher and then just dump all the ammo for the rocket launcher on the floor. That kind of thing, right? Which makes me realize, yeah, I'm probably going to give the player the option to manually dump certain ammunition types, not, yeah, just certain ammunition types. So, yeah, that's kind of like, so that's like why I wanted this mechanic is like, is it complete, like, art, like, unnecessary? Yes. But, like, I feel like it'll be, like, I feel like this will be way more fun than just being like, oh, you know, there's, like, this suspicious large red barrel on this level, and the walls of all the buildings are really thin, so if I just drag this barrel over to the, like, target, then I can get the target with this barrel, and it's like, nah. Like, this isn't that that much further away in terms of the complexity, but it is a bit less obvious, and I think far more interesting for that. And I'm obviously, like, I'm gonna have to, like, show the player that, hey, like, one, explosions go through everything, and they will actually go through everything. Now, there will be some enemies that'll be, like, immune to explosions. So the explosions won't always be like the, you know, like they're not always going to be the solution to every problem, but they're going to be a solution to many problems. So, yeah, and where was I going with this? Yeah, so I'll definitely have to, like, you know, like show the whole, like, explosive stack, explosions go through walls, and the basic conclusion of that is, like, as long as you can find enough, like, powerful enough explosives and build a big enough stack of them, you can punch through any wall. Basically. So, yeah. Actually, I just had an idea for, like, a potential silly optimization if I wanted this to grow like the explosions to grow indefinitely past a certain size. Because the thing is, like, because I'm adding the explosions volumetrically, the amount that they grow keeps getting smaller. So, like, once the volume reaches a certain size, I could just do, like, a size check instead of, like, because right now I'm taking a cube root, which of, like, I square the volumes and take a cube root, which is, like, not super cheap. But, like, if I have, like, an explosion with a radius of 10 and you're adding a radius 2 explosion into it, like, that radius 2 explosion is basically not going to change the size, like, almost at all. So you could add, like, just, like, a tiny, you know, fraction to it. The obvious potential concern with that is, like, yeah, but what if you have two piles of, like, 2-meter explosives that all both add up to, like, 10 meters? Which they can. If you have, like, 100 of these, I think it works out to, like, a 9-meter explosion. Though I'm not sure if 100 of these would actually be within triggering range of each other. Like, I don't think they would stack at that point. Oh, well. I can worry about that kind of stuff later. But yeah, so this is just a system that I really, really wanted in my game because it just opens up so many more creative options for killing things through walls, mainly. Because, yeah, I don't think, like, I am going to have pretty brain-dead AI, mostly because I don't want to, like, deal with having smart AI. But I'm not sure that they're going to be so brain-dead that, what did I want to, like, I'm not sure that I'm going to make them so brain-dead that they won't, like, notice you carrying explosives and not get suspicious. Especially because I do plan to just have, like, a threat system. So depending on what equipment the player character is carrying and, like, if they have a gun in their hand and that kind of thing, the player character will have, like, a threat level stat that they just, like, anytime they walk through the detection radius of a NPC, and I already have, like, the beginnings of that implemented. Like, anytime they walk through the detection radius, the NPC checks, like, what is the player's threat level. And if the player's threat level is high, like, because there's supposed to be some extra conditionals to the threat level checks. Like there's like if the NPC is in like an like if the player is in an unguarded zone, then the NPC doesn't care if their threat level is like 1. Because it's like, oh, it's not a guarded zone. But if they're in a guarded zone at threat level 1, well, that's a problem. But if they're threat level 0 in a guarded zone, then that's not a problem. And actually, I guess I could handle all of that on the player character themselves. Like, the player character's threat, like, the player character could just do the zone detection as well. And then the NPCs just have to check if the character is, like kill on sight or not. Yeah, that would simplify things quite a bit if I handled everything on, like, handled the detection area, like the threat, like security zones on the player character, and then the NPCs just check the player character for threat level. Anyway, so like as soon as you pick up one of these, I could just set the player character's threat level to like 1, right? Because like, and you might actually maybe. I guess I could have it be conditional somehow. Like you might have like there might be an excuse for handling explosives, especially if like because I do want certain levels to be like an ammunition factory or something. In which case, like if the NPC is like if the player were to pretend that they're like a worker, then they kind of have an excuse for carting around large quantities of explosives, right? Because they're like a worker at an ammunition factory. Then again, I could just handle that on the player character. That's really not a problem, yeah. And the NPCs don't need to know what the player is holding. They just need to know if the player is a threat. Yeah, the player character is going to become very bloated. Even more than they already are. Oh boy. Anyway, I think handling it on the player character is the best option. Anyway, so that's the kind of like sort of like design thoughts that go into my game is just like, yeah, I want simple rules that like I'd like to say complex consequences, but like this is really not that complicated. You put more explosives together, you get a bigger explosion, you can penetrate more armor. Whoa. Such complexity. But then you add on top of that like the security systems of like NPCs might, you know, get concerned about you hauling around the player hauling around explosives, and that sort of starts adding, you know, more and more complexity to the like, well, okay, I want to build a big pile of explosives, but where do I get them? How do I get them to where I need them? You know, and I want I want each individual portion of like part of that chain to be simple, but then like the chain actually ends up being kind of like, oh, actually something interesting instead of just, you know, here's a set piece, dear player, now use it on this other set piece. Because I've always found that really boring. So anyway, yeah, that's it for this this update on various non-gameplay features that are incredibly unnecessarily complicated for the game that I am like developing at a snail pace. So yeah, hopefully you found this somewhat interesting, even though it almost certainly isn't useful. And that's it. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.